Okay, good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. I will be presenting on the potential risk of implementation research in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. It is a literature review. It's an implementation research. Implementation research is becoming popular as an important generator of practical knowledge that can be translated into health policy. Also, with its aim to answer many questions about how to improve access to interventions that have been shown to work but have not reached many of the people who could benefit from them. Implementation research improves access to promising interventions that works to better benefit many, and also involves a wide range of particular ethical considerations that have not been comprehensively covered in international guidelines on health research ethics. The fundamental ethical principles governing clinical research apply equally in IR, but the application of these principles may differ depending on the implementation research question, context, and the nature of the proposed intervention. In implementation research, questions cover a broad range of topics that focus on improving health systems functioning and improving equitable and just access to effective healthcare interventions. Implementation research designs are flexible and are often innovative, and ethical principles cannot simply be extrapolated from their applications in clinical research. Meaningful engagement with all stakeholders include communities and research participants in a fundamental ethical requirement that cuts across all study phases of IR and links most ethical concerns. Careful modification of the informed consent process may be required in IR to permit study of a needed intervention. The risk associated with IR may be difficult to anticipate and may be very context-specific. The expectations that knowledge generated through IR should be rapidly translated into health policy and practice necessitates upfront commitments from decision makers to sustainability and scalability of effective interventions. In IR, greater awareness of the particular ethical implications of the features of IR is urgently needed to facilitate potential ethical conduct of IR and uniform ethical review. The benefits of IR may not accrue to the same groups who participate in the research. Therefore, justifying the risk versus benefits of IR may be ethically challenging. Implementation research in public health is to translate research findings and results into action for greater impact and benefits at a wider population level. The implementation research is important because it provides guidance to policy review and development, including informed decisions to address public health problems. Why this review was done? The main aim of the literature review is to identify potential risks or harms in conducting implementation research during the COVID-19 pandemic period, which we described under 5 main risks. The main aim of this review, there were predefined risks or harms posed by COVID-19 that they were In IR, the three phases of implementation research that may pose risk are: 1, planning phase, implementation phase, and the post-research phase. In planning phase, responsiveness to local needs and priorities. The study design is considered very critical during the planning phase, and the stakeholders and community engagement is also required during the planning phase. The balance between the risk and benefits are weighed and assessed during the planning phase. And in implementation phase, there is always informed consent and there is autonomy of the particular intervention or the research, and there is privacy and confidentiality during the implementation phase, and also the standard of care in all aspects is considered as important, and the community, the health system, the empowerment during the implementation phase is also very critical. During the post-intervention, post-research phase, what happened to the dissemination of the research findings? Does it have an owner to own the data? And how does it translate findings into public health action? So the data is to be owned and disseminated in a timely manner, and also be translated, the findings should be translated into action, and for sustainability and scalability of the interventions, and the benefits should be shared among the population. What are the 5 potential risks or harms of implementation research in the context of COVID-19? The risk existed before the COVID-19. The first one was personal risk, especially in clinical trials of medicines and drugs. You are likely to experience the personal risk, where individuals' risk of intervention and control groups or the standards of care are ignored and they are not being followed through. In individual harms, where there are sometimes risk of interventions where there is also not considered or not done to the population participants, and the researcher does not feel responsible for the risk during and after the research. The poor person who has participated in the clinical trials or in the pilot interventions are not being supported. Okay. In the second one is the social harms or the risk. In implementation research, you also experience stigmatization. The groups or the subjects involved in the study, access burden on marginal groups, especially if they are not consulted before the study. Example of stigmatization in the social harms, it's HIV/AIDS research that, as for example, the HIV clients were on ART, antiretroviral therapy, or they're on the treatment, and the treatment is provided for certain groups only, or those like in the beginning when the HIV pandemic, the HIV/AIDS was discovered in the world. Not every facility, so every country had the chances of access to ART. Most of them had difficulties, challenges in this area. Only few had access, and they were at greater risk of stigmatization. And there was the data collections sometimes were very difficult during the research. And during COVID-19 pandemic, those infected underwent like stigma due to strict restrictions for free movement of people. there were also social alarms of risk that were aggravated, which made the results of the higher studies to compromise, leading to increased bias. And about the review results, so almost 100% of the higher results were seen as biased. And some of the results were prematurely analyzed, resulting in bias. Financial risk during COVID-19. What is a financial risk in IR? Financial risk or harm occurs when incentives or vouchers used for research may destabilize the local economy, and sometimes the incentives are given or provided as handouts, or they are given to make their research possible. So during the COVID-19, those who have participated in the research, they were lack of concern as they were pushed to do things that were outside of their responsibilities. And those who participated in IR had lack of concern as they were placed in a way they cannot express their rights, and most of the healthcare workers were pulled out of their place of work to carry out COVID-19 activities were abused in a sense, so they were not given the chance, or they were not allowed to. It was strictly like forcing people to do the work, whether you are agreeing or you are disagreeing to some of the things that were done. So that's what happened, and more funding were used to control the COVID-19 pandemic, and at the same time, more rules in ethics were compromised due to pandemic. There were forced rules and measures were imposed against many human rights laws and ethics to safeguard the population. And they were in financial risk, like the amount of money or the funding support was huge in some ways, and the time to spend the money was shorter, and other emergencies that pop up during the emergency was not given that priority like the COVID-19 emergency. So COVID-19 was real, and it was a global emergency where every efforts were diverted to, including the financial resources. Okay, what is communal risk? Communal risk or harms sometimes cause cultural insensitivity to an intervention in implementation research. During COVID-19, communal risks were very high as it was a new disease, and there were a lot of controversies regarding the disease, social and mass media information. Sometimes it increased fake information which brought fear to many, rumors of COVID-19 infection and vaccines. Cultural and traditional norms of many indigenous people were abused. The cultural and traditional values of many indigenous people and the people in the country were abused, as many interventions on higher than had forced people to poorly being consented to collect data, or they were engaged as intervention and control groups. And these also provide timely data in short period of time. Example was randomized control trials in many of the studies that were done, clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccines. A study by Chen, HY 2022, the intervention done with the home care This is an example of one of these communal risk. The intervention done with the home care workers at risk to exercise their rights, and they were strapped to help themselves as it was very sensitive. Okay. Another potential risk to hire was the existing government system risk. Finally, the study involving established government or existing systems causing working staffs to be overworked, overwhelming health workers, and diversions of resource allocation to research area may occur in implementation research. There were crazy happenings or events happenings during the COVID-19. The ethics of majority were denied or ignored when strict restrictions were imposed to control the pandemic. Health workers were pushed and even forced to produce better outcome, and many of the staff fell sick while others were burned out, and some even died during the COVID-19 pandemic. All were pushed into the extreme to sacrifice their own lives. Others were dragged away from their comfort working environment to face the risk due to the COVID-19 pandemic in the course of their duties. It was very stressful and exhausting for elderly, and many got sick while others died from the COVID-19 disease. The risk in IR was worse as ethics at every point was missing, and application of the ethical issues were overlooked and otherwise extremely abused. What happened? The potential risk, stressful and exhausting health workers. The risk were worse as ethics at every point were missing. The health system was stressed, overwhelmed overwhelmed and overworked health workers. Caused many to do things that were outside of their ethics or their values, traditional values. Okay, in conclusion, the new potential risks that we identified is growing in recognition as an important the IR research is growing in recognition as an important generator of practical knowledge that can be translated into health policy. However, the the five potential risks that we identified as personal risk, social risk, financial, communal, and other risks, there were about four. Other risk to the environment, to the IR researcher, to the family and the communities, to the vulnerable population was also identified. And the recommendations for special consideration should be to include those risks identified in the future IR ethics toolkit revision and development. Thank you very much. And my contact is you need further information on this literature review. Thank you very much.